Tulpa is a side-scrolling puzzle game similar to 2010's Limbo. Each game has a strong theme of mystery and uses silhouettes as a part of the visuals. I was personally a fan of Limbo's minimalist art style and enjoyed its dangerous world, so Tulpa's surreal imagery and dark themes looked interesting to me. Does it hold up well to Limbo, and how does it stand on its own merits? Well, let's start with the premise. The game stars two playable characters, Ophelia and Oliver. One is alive, the other seems to be less alive. The game describes them as two soulmates, though they kinda look like brother and sister. The two journey through a strange world filled with lethal traps and puzzles. There's no dialogue, just a few instructions the game gives you. Any backstory will just have to be assumed as the game is vague and says nothing about its setting. Each character has their own ability. Ophelia can interact and push objects, while Oliver can use his telekinetic powers to lift items and pull far-off switches. The idea is to switch between the two characters to complete the puzzles and avoid obstacles. However, if one character is killed, both die. One minor gripe I have is when controlling one character, the other has to follow automatically. The two cannot be separated as it will affect Ophelia's sanity. If she sees something distressing or if she separates from Oliver, her sanity will drop, resulting in death. But when left unattended, Ophelia can walk off edges, and the same goes for Oliver, who will float away into death vortexes. Though this can be avoided by carefully switching between the two at the right time. I guess true love can make you forget to look where you're going. The characters' similar abilities leads to a problem. As the game goes on, you'll mainly be using Oliver to levitate items to solve all the puzzles, while Ophelia is just used to perform the platforming. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of synergy between the two characters' skills. As a result, it leaves a bit to be desired in the mechanics. This leads me to another issue I have, the platforming. In a game like Limbo, the platforming is fairly tight and responsive. However, in Tulpa, Ophelia's jumps are very strange and hard to get used to. I don't think I've ever played a character whose jumps I both underestimated and overestimated at the same time. Platforming isn't as big a focus as it is in Limbo, but when it comes to some jumping puzzles, it can still be a bit frustrating. Despite Tulpa's flaws, I feel it does do something very well, the visuals. The game uses silhouettes but mixes in shades of color, making things a lot more eye-catching. The character models are 3D but are solid colors, leading to a silhouette look. The strange visuals and environments are really complemented by the colors that are used. The blue world is calming, and the red world is intimidating, each setting having a nice mood. The variation of each stage is something that really made me want to keep going so I could see what else lied ahead. So, Tulpa's a puzzle game, right? How good are the puzzles? Well, they range from okay to very nebulous. There are a lot of times I had to consult a walkthrough because some of the puzzles were a bit too vague, and other times I forgot how high or how far Ophelia could jump, and the answer was just staring me right in the face. Another issue is when you have a hard time seeing what Oliver can interact with. The cursor only changes when you begin to interact with an item, and not when you hover over it. Though the game does say figuring out what you can interact with is a part of the puzzle, it would help if they gave you a better idea of what you could use. Take for example in a few puzzles where you have to interact with the writing underneath the ground. Up to this point there had been nothing to suggest you could actually do this. If the game had started off with an easier way to let you know you could interact with these kind of things, it would save you the time of randomly clicking all over the screen. Now this brings me to the last bullet point, the length of the game and its price. At full price the game is $10, and the game took me about 2 hours to beat. On my second playthrough about half as long. I think short games can be worth a $10 or $15 price point if there's enough polish, substance, and the experience was well worth it. But I'm not sure if I can recommend Tulpa at full price. You could watch a walkthrough of it and get most of the experience out of it. However, if you think the game looks interesting enough and you don't mind the quality of the puzzles and the length, I can recommend it at a few bucks. It has a very unique and interesting art style, and the atmosphere is nice. Now up to this point you know the game and what I thought about it. The story is very vague and up to your imagination, just like how Limbo's story was. So I'd like to give my take on what I thought the visuals and events may have meant. So if you're curious about watching or playing the game, best to come back to this video later. I have at least 4 theories for the plot of Tulpa, but first I want to touch on what I think are some major scenes. The game starts with Ophelia by herself in a town that seems fairly normal at first. She walks to the edge of the town where she finds an old shack, surrounded by police tape. Inside, Oliver is stuck to the wall with an occult circle and candles surrounding him. You quickly leave as not to harm Ophelia's sanity, but when you return, Oliver is gone. You then find the tree that brings you to the next world where things begin to get more surreal and less like our reality. This world, the green world, is where you find Oliver and are finally able to use him. Before you get to him, you find multiple versions of his body in different positions, all of which seem to imply he killed himself or was murdered. After completing green and purple worlds, you arrive in the final level, the red world. Here's where some of the darkest imagery is. You continue along until you meet a tall man in a suit with an eye for a face. In the ground you can see a message that states, "Do not trust his smiling face." This message could be referring to a future puzzle where a spinning mask attempts to trick you. Considering that the eye guy doesn't seem to have an actual face, This message might not be talking about him, but it's still interesting. To continue past him, Ophelia pushes a gold object to him. It looks either like a throne or some kind of idol. The eye guy accepts this and opens up the path to you. It is also worth noting that he is surrounded by candles, just like how Oliver's body was in the shack. The ground that the eye guy is standing on is surrounded by objects that look like dream catchers, and the next puzzle also utilizes similar objects. The final puzzle has Oliver using a giant scale. On one side, you lift Ophelia, who weighs it down. In order to bring the scale to a level position, you pull 3 silhouettes off of crosses and put them on the other side. This evens out and Oliver leaves Ophelia and heads towards the last tree, which seems to be made out of dream catchers. He floats towards a chair and noose and disappears, the chair eventually falling over. And end credits. So what did it mean? Well, let's start with theory 1. It meant nothing. Yep, the game designers just made a ton of weird ambiguous stuff so that people who overthink things, like me, would analyze it. The next theory is a bit less of a cop-out. Theory 2, it was all in Ophelia's head. She's either nuts or she had a mental journey where she eventually comes to terms with the death of Oliver. There are 4 stages in the game, which could maybe be interpreted as 4 out of 5 of the 5 stages of grief. In the final scene, it could be that she has accepted Oliver's passing. Another interesting thing worth noting is that supposedly a Tulpa is a being created by thought. Perhaps Ophelia created a duplicate of Oliver in her mind to help her deal with his death. However, this theory still leaves a lot of questions for some of the visuals and events. Theory 3 is my favorite. Ophelia messed with dark magic. After the death of her soulmate, Ophelia is visited by the eye guy in her dreams. He offers her the knowledge to be able to see Oliver again, but at some sort of price. He gives her the instructions to perform a spell, and she complies, taking Oliver's body to the shack and setting up the ritual. She's able to see him again, but it is in a realm between life and death. At the end of the journey, Ophelia is tried for using dark magic and attempting to bring back the dead, while Oliver leaves to pass on to the next life. Theory 4 is in the completely other direction. Ophelia murdered Oliver. She killed him so that she could perform a ritual, possibly with the help of the eye guy, so that their 2 souls could be tethered together forever. This explains why if one dies, both die, and why they can't separate. Oliver eventually leads her to a place where she's judged for her crimes, and he leaves to go on to the next world. Or maybe he double killed himself, which is like a double negative, so it brings you back to life. Okay, maybe not that last bit. Whichever theory you may believe, or if you have your own, it's interesting to try and interpret the game. It might mean nothing, or there could be some tragic tale behind the images of giant robot insects and deadly peacocks. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Tulpa. It was a flawed game with lacking mechanics and a bit sparse in content, but the mystery and visuals kept me going. If the studio behind it were to make more games, I'd definitely give them a look. Just make some better jump puzzles next time.